Welcome to the Reconnection Club podcast, the show that helps parents heal troubled relationships with their adult sons and daughters. I'm your host, psychotherapist Tina Gilbertson. Each week, I'll offer you compassion, clarity, and personal development tips designed to help you reconnect, not only with your child, but with yourself. Now let's get started. Most people seem to believe that we shouldn't get sympathy for any problem we brought on ourselves. If I keep delaying putting gas in my car and then I run out of gas on the freeway, you're not supposed to feel sorry for me because I brought that on myself. If I'd gone to the gas station when the tank was low, I wouldn't be in this mess, right? But I've always felt uncomfortable with the idea of withholding compassion for myself or anyone who is suffering, even from problems we quote-unquote bring on ourselves. And I think this is relevant to the conversation around parent-adult-child estrangement because the loneliness, disconnection, despair, and lack of support that both estranged adult children and their parents potentially experience during estrangement could be framed by unsympathetic others as a problem that each of them, in some way, has brought on themselves. I'd like to explain why I personally do feel sympathetic and supportive toward people with problems society might call self-inflicted, in the hope of raising awareness, compassion, and understanding for the human condition and the deep and universal pain of family estrangement. I'm not going to address the question of who brings on estrangement between parents and adult children, because even if that question had a simple answer, for the purposes of reconnection, I don't find it relevant. Instead, I want to explore the implications of withholding emotional support for problems categorized as self-inflicted. Because self-inflicted suffering is part of the human condition, and failing to understand that fact means possibly failing to understand both ourselves and our children. The natural response to the suffering of anyone in pain, for any reason, is compassion. If we don't feel that, it's because we were taught that people don't deserve compassion in response to their suffering, unless it's objectively and totally not their fault. For example, maybe they were just standing there minding their own business, and they got hit by a car or struck by lightning. And now they're facing a long and painful recovery. They didn't ask for that, so we're allowed to feel for them unreservedly. The trouble is, problems like that may be less common than problems in which one does arguably play some part. What if that person who was hit by a car was standing in the middle of the road on a dark night? What if they were struck by lightning while golfing during a thunderstorm? Should we reduce our compassion for their suffering on that basis? You might say, well, yes, we should. But then we have to look at ourselves in the mirror and witness the coldness in our own eyes. It is we who ultimately have to live with our lack of empathy. Unfortunately, we can never hope to truly accept ourselves without it. Now, there are cases where someone seems to just ask for trouble, and they keep making decisions that bring it on. It's hard to sympathize with them when the inevitable results of what they're doing come back to haunt them. But in my opinion, if a person continually creates avoidable problems for themselves, that fact alone deserves compassion and maybe concern. Why did they do that to themselves? Where and when and how did they develop the capacity for that much suffering and lack of self-care? When I think about why we bring problems on ourselves, the first reason that comes to mind is ignorance. We just don't know that what we're doing will turn out the way it does. If we punish ourselves and others for not knowing things, where do we draw the line? At what age do we stop guiding children and expect them to just know how to behave? And while we're making those decisions, what is reasonable for every adult in society to know, given that we all have different learning from growing up in different families? It seems to me that, unlike the legal system, where ignorance of the law is no excuse, Working relationships make room for the fact that we don't always know what we quote-unquote should. A second way we might bring problems on ourselves is through our own needs, beliefs, fears, and expectations. Much of our behavior, especially in relationships, is motivated by those. But here's the catch: we're often unaware of them. We start learning about relationships and how to be in them before we even learn to speak. Our understanding is pre-verbal. It's implicit rather than explicit knowledge. We start relating to other humans as soon as we're born. What we learn in the first few years, we don't consciously connect to years later as adults. This means that some of our behavior is motivated by needs, beliefs, fears, and expectations that are outside of our awareness. If we bring problems on ourselves, it's not necessarily because we're careless, unintelligent, or unworthy, even if we're paying attention and trying to do the right thing. Unconscious motives are by definition beyond our reach, and thus out of our control. Just as one example, if my basic need for visibility is not sufficiently met, that is, if I don't ever quite feel seen, recognized, or appreciated, then I might do anything and everything for other people in the unconscious hope that someone will eventually notice me. And then I might find that because I do everything for everyone all the time, I'm always taken for granted, thus perpetuating the problem I was trying to solve, which was my unmet need to be seen and appreciated. This is not to say that we shouldn't hold ourselves and others accountable for our behavior. Of course we should. But I'm not talking about whether to hold people accountable. I'm talking about whether we should sympathize with them when their problems seem self-inflicted. In my mind, those are two separate questions. If we ignore the reasons why people bring unwanted outcomes on themselves, then I think we're in trouble as a society. Why people behave the way they do should matter to us, not to excuse their behavior. Again, every adult is accountable for their actions, but to avoid demonizing human beings because of their very humanity. We can reject behavior without rejecting people. We can disapprove of behavior without disapproving of people or abandoning them when they're in pain. Because we're human and not perfectly efficient or methodical in all ways, we do have some hand in many of the problems that befall us. But that is hardly a reason to add insult to injury by blaming ourselves for the suffering that results and refusing to be compassionate. So the next time you find yourself tempted to withhold sympathy or fellow feeling for yourself or anyone else who seems to have brought a problem on themselves, remember that you are a loving, lovable, and still growing human being, and the natural response to all suffering is compassion. So please take good care of yourself and others. Bye for now. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Reconnection Club podcast, I invite you to check out reconnectionclub.com. The Reconnection Club is for parents at any stage of estrangement from their adult, child, or children. So whether you've just realized there's trouble between you, you've been living with estrangement for years, or you're newly reconciled but still walking on eggshells, the Reconnection Club is your essential resource for information, support, and continued personal growth. With our courses and workshops, expert interviews, monthly Q&A calls, and a friendly, active community, the Reconnection Club is a wonderful place to be for anyone suffering the pain of estrangement from an adult, child, or children. So check it out at reconnectionclub.com.